Professor, welcome address கொடுக்கவா?
கொடுங்க.
Sir.
Okay. Good morning to all. This is a wonderful day for the PG and Research Department of History, Aringaranna Government Arts College, Musiri. Our seminar topic is Analysis of Landscape Architecture with reference to the Vijayanagara capital, Hampi. I am very glad to welcome address. I am Dr. M. Raja Ravindran, HOD. My heartiest welcome to our principal, Dr. M.K. Rajkumar and Patton. I express my warm welcome, Dr. Priya Thakur, Assistant Professor, Department of History and Archaeology, Tumkur University, Karnataka. I welcome Professor G. Sudha, Organizing Secretary, PG and Research Department of History, Aringaranna Government Arts College, Musiri. This is an immense pleasure to welcome Dr. Palnichami, Webinar Coordinator. This is my bounden duty to welcome our staff members, Professor R. Paramasivam, Dr. R. Ahila, Professor L. Chandragasan, Dr. S. Sugandhi, Professor R. Mary Stella, Dr. B. Perundevi, Rajan, and the participants from the various colleges and the various universities. Once again, I welcome to all. Thank you.
Dr. Priya Thakur. She is an assistant professor at the Department of Studies and Research in History and Archaeology, Tumkur University in Karnataka. Previously, she has worked as a research trainee under a DST project related to archaeoastronomy at the Indian Institute of Astrophysics, Bangalore. She has done her MA in AIHC and Archaeology from DDU Kharagpur University and received 2 gold medals. She was at UGC JRF and obtained her PhD from the University of Mysore in Ancient History and Archaeology. She has published a book, Secular Architectural Landscape of the Vijayanagara period in 2019. Her research interests lie mainly in cultural studies, archaeology, art history, and epigraphy. She has carried out research projects funded by ICHR and UGC. She has published more than 40 research papers and has presented 50 research papers in national and international conferences and seminars. She is associated with national and international associations like the Indian Society for Prehistoric and Quaternary Studies, Epigraphical Society of India, Indian Art History Congress, and Society for South Asian Archaeology. These are the qualities which she have herself. Once again, I welcome you, ma'am.
Okay, so good morning to everyone. I will start my presentation, and before that, I would like to thank the Honorable HOD of the department, Dr. Palnichami sir also, who has been kind enough to give me this opportunity to be part of this event. And I would also like to thank Dr. Subha, who had given a very kind and warm welcome to me. And now with this, already we have lost some time in technical issues. So I will be starting my presentation now. And I hope everybody can see the slides. So as you are aware, my topic of today's presentation is going to be on analysis of landscape architecture with reference to Vijayanagara capital, Hampi. So everybody is aware about the students of history, about the history of Vijayanagara and the political as well as cultural significance of the archaeological site of Hampi. I'm not able to move the slide. Oh, got it. So now this is just a geographical location where the Hampi archaeological site is located. So as you must be also aware that Hampi is one of the UNESCO World Heritage Sites in India. And it's a huge archaeological site. Still excavations are going on by the Archaeological Survey of India as well as State Archaeological Department. And the idea of this topic, when we talk about landscape architecture, most of our students are familiar with the concept of architecture. But when we talk about landscape architecture, so I just wanted to give a background what I will be talking about in the presentation. So before that, if we have to understand, the Hampi site is an urban site. That means it was a capital of Vijayanagara Empire. So how this urban concept starts in world history. So it is just a background of that. Students of history and archaeology are familiar with this basic concepts that cities were established around 6,000 years ago with the first urban agglomerations appearing in the Near East. And one of the earliest sites which we have is somewhere in Jordan and Lebanon. And afterwards, we have subsequent development of urbanism, what we call as Sabhyata or civilization also, seen in different parts of the world. For example, Egypt in Africa, Indian subcontinent, China and Europe, as well as Mesoamerica, as well as Andes. But these civilizations had some kind of contact, which we are not clearly aware till today. And in context of Indian example, everybody is familiar with the famous sites of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro belonging to the Indus Valley sites. So they are the famous examples of urbanization and the important elements of town planning, housing, drainage, and other such things. So these urbanism concepts are based on local conditions. Local conditions, if you are aware, any place, any geographical area or any archaeological site develops from zero to something. That zero is based on what are the kind of supporting or positive factors which are going to promote the growth and how the environment is supportive for the growth and development of the human group there. So based on that, the landscape architecture can be understood. Now coming to the main keywords, landscape architecture is a modern concept. It has come in last 100 years or something. And it was part of our architectural history since a very long period. But in modern sense, Frederick Law Olmsted, he is considered as the father of landscape architecture. And one of his most famous works is the famous Central Park in New York City of America. And basically landscape architecture is combination of many disciplines. It focuses on the activities of planning a construction, designing the various parts of the construction. It can be a building, it can be a garden, it can be a water fountain, it can be anything which comes together to create some kind of structure. Then in case of Hampi also we'll be discussing this particular point, that landscape architecture always tries to find a balance between what is naturally present in that particular area and what is being constructed. So these two elements, the natural part and the constructed part, are combined together to create an example of architectural work. And at present times in research studies as well as in work related concepts, landscape architecture has grown up as a very nice profession. And this profession is a very multidisciplinary approach. It focuses on art, architecture, environmental science, ecological requirements, religious and cultural concepts. And it focuses on the natural terrain. Terrain means the natural topography, geography of that particular area. And it doesn't disturb it, but it enhances its quality. If something is damaged or lost, it tries to recreate it or makes some kinds of alteration in the existing landforms. So this was the introduction of the concept of landscape architecture. Now, when we talk about cultural landscapes, Hampi is an example of cultural landscape. As per the definition of UNESCO, I will not read it. So UNESCO, when it decided to take Hampi as a World Heritage Site, one of the criteria was that it was a cultural landscape. That means already its presence in a beautiful geographical area without much disturbance to the original geography of that area. The construction and the history of that area has evolved in parallel to and in support to the geography of that region. So it was selected as the cultural landscape. Now, when we talk about landscape, there are three types of landscape. One is man-made landscapes. These are very common today. And in Indian architectural history, Mughal rulers are very popular, as it is believed that they were the ones who started the tradition of these landscapes. For example, I will be discussing one next slide. Example is like Taj Mahal. Taj Mahal, everybody is familiar with, but it is not only a single building. I will show you that the whole complex of Taj Mahal, it includes gateways, gardens, fountains, other buildings, minars, towers, everything comes together as a beautiful landscape. But that whole thing is man-made and designed to make it aesthetically beautiful. The second one is organically evolved landscape. This will be discussing. Hampi is part of example of this particular concept, in which a particular area or particular tradition has developed in a place. It is still developing, it has not died, and there is some kind of evolution going on. And the other one is associative cultural landscape, where mostly the focus is on intangible heritage and intangible concepts. So moving ahead, I was just talking about the man-made landscape. This is one example, a very famous one. Mughals were very popular of making beautiful gardens all over India, especially in Jammu Kashmir, the famous Shalibar gardens, then Charminar gardens. So in this case, this is example of Taj Mahal. As you can see, the architects, when they planned this construction, they had the Yamuna River as one of the lines or one of the borders of that planning, and everything else was fixed, keeping that in the brain. Now, coming now to the main topic. This was just a background of how the landscape has developed. Now, coming to the site of Vijayanagara Hampi. In modern times, at present times, Hampi is just one village at the site. Okay, so during the 13th, 14th, 15th century, the whole empire, the complete empire was called as Vijayanagara. Its capital was also called as Vijayanagara. And in modern day, the site of Hampi is part of that Vijayanagara empire capital. There are many other such suburbs, like how every big city has suburbs. So that time also Hampi was one of the suburbs of this empire, capital of this empire. So this is just a geographical concept, that what is a geographical area, where it is located, its latitude and longitude, and what are the geographical boundaries of this particular site. And Tungabhadra River, one of the very popular rivers of Karnataka, it is one of the boundaries or one of the major elements of the geographical landscape of the site. And it is also one of the major source of water to different parts of the site, which helped in or which promoted the growth of this particular site as a habitation from a small or remote village community, later to a political power center. And other details are provided here. This is a map which I have taken from George Michel. He has done a lot of work on this particular area, survey and publications. This map, I will be showing you some satellite images now. So this map gives a basic idea. This is a very well-published map. Everywhere the students can see it. This shows the division of the landscape of this particular archaeological site, that the religious sites focus in particular points. They are called as religious centers. Then there are royal enclosures in which we find many palaces and other such things. So I will just move ahead. Vijayanagara Empire or Hampi was a very popular site since the colonial period. So this particular handmade map is by Colonel Mackenzie, a very famous surveyor of East India Company who worked in this part of India. He did a lot of work in Malabar, Karnataka, Andhra, and Tamil Nadu region. And this is one of the earliest maps published, which is handmade by Colonel Mackenzie. Now, before we move ahead, when we talk about landscapes, So in Vijayanagara, we have examples of different kind of markets, bazaars, streets, chariot or Ratha Vidhi. Then we have palaces, palace remains. We have our different or military structures. We have many temples, and these temples are not individual structures, but they are complete huge complexes. And also because water was a major basic requirement for a huge capital, which had almost a population of nearly 50,000 at one time. So how the water was getting supplied. So this is a particular graph based on Kathleen Morrison. It represents the distribution of water related constructions. Okay, so during the whole Vijayanagara period history, it is whatever inscriptions are there which mention the construction of new tanks, construction of irrigation canals, or donation or land grants made to the maintenance or restoration or renovation of such water bodies. That gives a number and the idea of how much focus was given to water sources, because they were the base for the sustainability of this particular site. And as I told you, this was a very popular site, Vijayanagara Empire. Many foreigners traveled to this place. It was a trade center. It was a political power center. So many foreign visitors, traders who passed through this region. I have just given a list of them. Most of them are very familiar with the history students also. And it gives you a glimpse of how almost for nearly 200 years, Vijayanagara was mentioned by the various foreign writers, and the writings of these foreign authors or foreign travelogues give us very interesting information about the Vijayanagara culture, Vijayanagara city, the king, his power, his activities in detail. And most of these were in their vernacular language. Religious, if we look at the religious landscape, it includes different temple complexes, freestanding mandapas, which has some kind of shrine or god inside, and open air shrines in which there is no structure, but the deity is present in some iconic form. Then we have civil landscape, civil structural landscape. That means something which is not related to religion or defense related. So we have many palatial structures. We have ceremonial structures. Ceremonial structures, if I define in simple terms, any structures which was used for some kind of ceremonial ritual by the king and his family. Then we have variety of water structures. Water structures again are something which was related to the supply, storage, and movement of water. So we have many kind of tanks. In tanks also again we have two categories: public, which was accessible to everyone; ceremonial, again, which had some ritualistic importance and it was accessible to a selected group of population. Then we have irrigation canals, we have baths. Many baths are there, either for public or for royal families. Then many water wells are there. Then we have free pavilions. Free pavilions, pavilions, if translated in Sanskrit, are mandapas. Okay, structures which have ceiling and no walls, but pillars are there. So there are many pavilions scattered in and around the Vijayanagara capital. Then we have roads and streets. Many roads and streets are there. I will be showing you the photographs in the next slides. We have some evidence of bridges. We have inscriptional and archaeological evidences of markets and pathways. And third section is, because Vijayanagara Empire, it was a capital of Vijayanagara Empire, so it has many defense-related constructions. First one is the military paraphernalia. Paraphernalia means things related to military. So they have animal stables, armory, soldier gymnasium, quarters for the guard, such kind of things. Many types of fortifications are there. According to the literature or foreign travelogues, Vijayanagara Empire had 7 lines of fortification. So we have many examples: interior fortifications, exterior fortifications. Then we have many gateways. So these gateways are either for defensive purpose or they are for ceremonial purpose, like a decoration or some kind of monumental reasons. And then we have many watchtowers. So watchtowers are either freestanding or they are part of a enclosure. Enclosure means a boundary wall constructed around something important which is placed inside, usually a palace or an office or something else. Now, moving ahead, as I told you, we can divide the Vijayanagara architectural landscape into two sections. One is the sacred center. Sacred basically means religion related, God related. So in the beginning of the presentation, I was talking about markets and bazaars and economic centers. So as I believe our history students are familiar, that whenever a town or a city develops during the ancient or medieval times, most of the time there will be a religious center somewhere, and that religious center supports and promotes the growth of that human habitation area or human settlement from a small village economy and slowly to a town or a city and later as a metropolitan. So in this case also, we see that the Vijayanagara capital, including Hampi region, it was having some very important temple complexes, and those temple complexes were responsible for development of independent market zones, and these market zones later developed as independent suburbs, and these suburbs were having some kind of specialized production houses, some kind of specialized what you call as markets, and these are mentioned in inscriptions as well as in the writings of the foreign people who visited that during that particular period. So this is a particular sacred center. I will just show you the images. Now this is the satellite image. Okay, so the green thing which you are seeing here, this line, this happens to be the Tungabhadra river, which is creating the northern boundary for the site. And this green area which you are seeing, this is a very nicely, very fertile, flat land, which was used for agricultural activities. And we find many agricultural activities going on even till today. So this is the place, the green zone, where you find the villagers or common population and human settlement even now. So these three circles, they represent the three important temple complexes with independent bazaars during that period. And out of all the temples in Vijayanagara, if you are familiar, only one temple is a living temple. That means still now the worshipping is going on. So that is the Virupaksha temple. It was there in that site even before the Vijayanagara rulers came to power. It is predated to Vijayanagara, and it was called as Hampa. The name of the area was Pampa, which became Hampa, and finally became Hampi. So this particular area, this represents the Virupaksha temple complex. This represents the Thiruvengalnatha or Achitraya temple in this area. This one represents the Vithala temple. Okay, so moving ahead, I will be discussing each group separately. So now this one, as I told you that before the Vijayanagara rulers came and established their center in this particular geographical area, already it was an important religious center, at least in Hoysala or Kadapa period. So we find many temples, none of them are living, no worshipping is done there, on the southeast side of the Virupaksha temple. So again, as you can see, the concept of landscape, it's that completely hilly terrain. You can see that rocky crops are there, and on that rocky slope, all these small temples built in the Kadamba Vesra style, that you can see the small shikhara that has been created. So these all are predated to Vijayanagara. They are not from Vijayanagara period. Now, I was talking about the first oldest temple in this area, still living temple, still worshipping is going on. So this is the Virupaksha temple complex as well as the temple street. So in South India, most of the temples have a tradition that they will be having a pushkarni or a water tank. So you can see here, this is the whole temple complex. The main Garbhagudi surrounded with the cloisters of mandapa or rooms, the main Raigopura, other necessary offices and other such things. So this one whole thing is the complex of the temple. The Pushkarni is just on the north side of it. And starting from here till this point, this is the temple street. So almost 10 years ago, almost 15 years ago, this whole thing was encroached by the local population. They had occupied the mandapas and they were running their own businesses, and residential purposes were being used. So after 2007-8, the Archaeological Survey of India and UNESCO, they removed all these encroachments, they cleaned all those things. So if you go now, you will not see any local population residing there. The local villagers stay in this particular Hampi village. Now this particular street, it was called as the Rath Vidhi, or the Chariot Road, Chariot Street, in which there is a huge wooden chariot placed outside. During the particular specific days, the chariot was to move. But this not only served a religious purpose, but it was also a center for the economic activities, because these markets, this particular street was full of market items of different products. And the foreign writers have mentioned about the grand variety of items from different parts of world being available in this particular market. Now this is a visual of the same temple. So this I was talking about. So you have the main temple here. This is the Rai Gopura. The Pushkarni is on the other side. The Tungabhadra river flows this side. Okay. On the other side, you can see the complete hilly rocks. And then here is the interior of the temple. Now, all the material which was used in these things, there we come and talk about the use of local material easily available. That was the local granite. And all the construction was used by using that particular stone only. Now this was the street I was showing. So this is the Virupaksha temple in the background. This is the complete street. So this is the view from the two different sides. This is view from the opposite side of the temple. This is the view from the side of the temple. So as you can see, this whole street, the stones, everything has been excavated and exposed by the Archaeological Survey of India. The Archaeological Survey of India has been working on this region since 1950s. Okay, from almost like 60-70 years, they have been working on this region. So still excavation works are going on all over the site. So these were the mandapas I was talking about, that it was earlier occupied by the local public. Afterwards, it was cleared, and now it is a whole, this thing is part of the temple complex of Virupaksha complex. So now this whole thing is one street. And as per the inscriptions and the foreign records, all these things were used for the economic activities as well as the religious activities. Now the second particular temple complex, which is very famous, is the Vithala temple complex. It is on the other side of Virupaksha. So here you have the huge temple complex, many other structures related to the temple complex, a huge Pushkarni, and other related small shrines scattered all over the structures. This is how the temple looks like. So this is our main temple. The Tungabhadra flows this side. So as you can see, both important temples are somewhere just next to the Tungabhadra river. These are other shrines and other structures which are still being excavated by the Archaeological Survey of India. The next one is Tiruvengalnatha temple, popularly known as Achyutaraya temple complex. Again, the Tungabhadra river flows this side. This is the market street or Rathabidi of the temple. This is our main complex. And this is a huge Pushkarni, which is still being renovated and restored by the Archaeological Survey of India. This is how it looks like. Okay, so here you have the main temple. The Shikhara is gone, but you can see the Gopurams of the structure that had multiple entrances. Most of the thing has been cleaned and restored by the Archaeological Survey of India in last 30-40 years. So this is one image you can see. This is again from the Achyutaraya temple. This is the road or the street in front of the temple. And this is how the excavation has exposed the original road. So they are just making trenches and cleaning the road. And this is how the Vijayanagara period surface is now visible, with the mandapas in the both sides, which used to serve as the purpose of the markets during specific days. Now, this is the Pushkarni of the same temple. Again, as you can see, it has been damaged. So restoration work is going on. The next one temple is very small temple, Krishna temple complex. It was built by Krishna Deva Raya for a particular reason in 1513 AD to commemorate his victory over the Odisha rulers. So these things, students of history must have read in political history. So this is a particular structure of the temple complex, and the whole street and the Pushkarni, everything is in the same plan. So the focus of all these temples was, if you look at the inscriptions of this particular period, they are called as Krishna Pura, Achitaraya Pura. Okay, so Pura means town. So that means these temples were the core of that particular township in which the population used to reside. Now this is how the temple looks like. So all those things were the religious part. Now coming to the royal center, in which we find many palaces and such other structures. So this is again a satellite image which give you the idea of the extent of these structures. So whatever we discussed about the temples and everything, that is on the northwest and the north of this area. So here you have, it is called as royal enclosure or Dandanayaka enclosure and mint enclosure. These names I will be talking in the end why these names are like this. So we have again satellite image. Archaeology students should know a little bit about this, history and archaeology students. When you are looking at a satellite image, you will see things which are not clear or visible through naked eye when you are on the ground level. So here we have, these all are enclosure walls, boundary walls. So these boundary walls of fortifications, what we call as, because this whole area was where the king used to reside, the king used to hold audience, his darbar or court was in this particular area. So it has multiple lines of fortification as a defense element. So you can see so many walls surrounding the structures inside. These structures which you look, the squares, geometrical shapes, they are basically the palace basements. We don't have complete structures as such in this region in many numbers. We have only few structures which are 100% or 80% in a preserved condition. Most of the structures now we see is only in the form of basement or foundation or something like that. But we get the idea of what was the shape of the structure, what could have been the limits of the building, what was the design of the building by looking at these plans. And these are the water bodies inside this enclosure, which served some kind of ceremonial as well as ritualistic purposes. And then we have a very small temple, which was probably used as a royal chapel, that is a personal temple for the royal family, which is called as Hazara Rama temple in this particular area. This also has a Deepastamba in front of it and a beautiful small street in front of it. Okay, we'll be discussing the photographs in the next PPTs. Now, one of the most famous structures at this particular site is called as the Mahanavami Dibba. Dibba in Kannada means basically a platform. So this, archaeologically or architecturally speaking, it's a platform. But what you see is not its exact 100% perfect plan. It was damaged, and when the restoration work started, so whatever the archaeological survey could find, they somehow tried to give it a shape. So what we see in front of us today, it is not as actual original planning, but basically it is a stage, okay, or a platform on which there are 3 levels of this particular stage. It's very high, and on which the king used to sit and hold open court during specific important days. It is called as Mahanavami because Abdul Razak and other foreign writers mention that the king used to witness a parade or a procession by sitting on such kind of platforms. So based on that information, the structure has become famously known as Mahanavami Dibba. If you look at from the Mahanavami Dibba, this is how you see in front of your eyes. There are many basements, many structures, many water tanks. There are more than 6 water tanks within this enclosure in front of the platform. Okay. And again, very interesting thing is the aqueduct system, the water supply system, which we see here. So this is our Mahanavami Dibba. I just showed you the picture earlier. And this is different kind of tanks, which is inside that area. And how the water is being supplied to that tank, it is done through an aqueduct system. Aqueduct basically means water pipe. So they have used stone slabs to supply water to different tanks. So here you can see the example, how the water was being supplied to this particular tank. Okay. Now you see, this is another look from the same thing. This is called as a hydraulic technology, in which water pressure was used to move water from the lower level to higher level. So this was one of the running water system in which the water used to be supplied to different kind of tanks. One of the most popular tanks of this area called as a stepped tank. Again, it was not an original structure. Most of the archaeologists believe that in the Vijayanagara period, it was reconstructed or renovated because each stone has particular number or some kind of symbol or alphabets in Telugu. And the stone is different. This whole tank is not made of granite, which was a local stone. Chloritic cyst, which is not locally available. So it is believed that this particular tank was recreated by shifting stones from some other particular tank. But we don't have any details available about such reconstruction. Now, this is one of the largest water structure at the site, which is called as King's Bath. It is just next to the previous tank. And all these things, you can see the mandapa and the pavilion part is broken, but still in the restoration work, they have done the cleaning of the particular structure. And this is one particular example. It is a small terracotta pipe between the walls, which used to give us some idea how they were moving water across the enclosure walls. Now, these are small palaces, as I was talking about how the palace basement looks like. All the upper part is gone. Probably it is gone because either it was made of wood or bricks which was stolen or damaged or something like that. We don't know the actual reason, but now what we see in front of us is basically only the basement part. Okay, but this basement gave us idea about what was the plan or the design of the particular residence or a house, how many floors could have been there, and what kind of decorations were used. Now, this is one interesting thing. This is a stone trough, water trough, that is used to store drinking water for probably animals. So it is within the royal enclosure. That means even Abdul Razak and Domenico Pace mentions that when the court officials, amatyas, ministers, they used to come to meet the king, they will leave their horses outside and the horses will be drinking water from water troughs. So probably it is example of such kind of water provided to the animals of the people who used to come to visit the king during that particular period. So as you can see, it's a huge monolithic structure. Monolithic means made of single stone, no joining, nothing. So it was probably cut and made on the spot by using the locally available stone at the same place. So this shows us how marvelously technologically advanced the artists of that period were. Now, I was just talking about the Hazara Rama temple. It's a very small temple, one of the smallest in the site. And it was supposed to be maybe the family temple or the temple dedicated only for the kings. And it was not accessible for the local population because its location is within the palace area. So it is called as Hazara Rama. Basically, it's a Krishna temple. It's called as the Hazara Rama temple because on the boundary walls, outside as well as inside of the temple, they have the whole series of the Ramayana story represented. Okay, so in the sculpture forms, in the relief forms, and that is why the name became Hazara Rama, the story of Rama. It is also very famous for its beautiful carving inside the mandapa. You can see the beautiful carvings seen on the temples. Now, next one, as I was talking about different baths or water bodies. So this is the tank, step tank I showed you. This is the public bath, one of the largest structures. Just all these things are inside a boundary wall. Just on the south side of it, there is another small structure, a square structure, which looks very plain from outside, and it is identified as Queen's Bath. Okay, so this is called as King's Bath, which is a very open, large structure. This is a small structure called as Queen's Bath. This is how it looks like. From outside, it is very simple. And this is the plan of the structure, but this is how it looks from inside. upper part is, lot of parts are damaged, but now it has been cleared and restored by the Archaeological Survey of India. So this is basically a water bath area, maybe for, it is called as Queen's Bath because it has small cabins and rooms for privacy. So probably the women of the royal family may had come to this place to take bath during particular days. It has balcony kind of design, and it has, this is the input of the tank. The water used to come from this area, and this is the outlet, where the water, the used water could have gone out for the cleaning purpose. And outside this structure, there's a moat. Moat is a defensive concept in which forts used to have moat so that the enemies couldn't go inside. So interestingly, even this particular structure has a moat. Now we have some interesting designs, part of the landscape. This is one interesting canal which just runs out of the enclosure. And this has this kind of designs, plate and bowl kind of design. And it has been identified as Utta the Kalave in inscriptions, or feeding canal. So many archaeologists and art historians believe that it was a place where the soldiers could have been provided food or something. Now, these are pavilions, as I was talking about in the categorization of these structures. Pavilions, as I told you, it won't have walls. It will have pillars or something like that. So this is a water pavilion. That means there is a small stone tank inside, which is covered, and that stone tank was used to store water for people who used to travel, for them to give drinking water to them. Now, this is the other aspect. One was a royal enclosure. This is called as Zanana enclosure, where they have some palaces, some structures, elephant stable, guards quarters, treasury, then watchtowers here, here, and here. I will show you the actual images now. This whole area is still under excavation. This area also now at present, it is the Museum of State Archaeology, this area. This whole area is still under excavation, and these are called as noblemen quarters. Noblemen are the people who used to work for the king, the ministers, the army officials. So maybe they used to live in this area. So this is the extent of the noblemen quarters. You can see so much excavation has been done. Still excavation is going on. Almost more than 200 small and big structures have been excavated. This is how they look like. Again, there is no upper part, only the basements are there. They all have huge boundary walls surrounding. Most of the structures have their own water supply in a form of a well. They have water wells within that design. Now, coming to the Zanana enclosure, this is a very famous structure, one of the rare examples of an intact preserved building. It is called as Lotus Mahal or Kamala Mahal. Last, I will tell you why these names are there like that, because it looks like a lotus. But what was the purpose of these structures? It is not clear. A lot of different thoughts are there. Some call it as a palace, some call it as an office, some call it as a pavilion for entertainment, just like that. So yeah, I was talking about why these names are given. Zanana enclosure, Lotus Mahal, council room, all these things. These names are not original. When the British came to this area and they started surveying this area, when the Archaeological Survey of India started working in this area, they give names to all these buildings and structures. So as a result, these names became popular on same names. Original names we are not familiar with. Now what we say is either the popular names or what are the names mentioned in the archaeological reports. So inside this enclosure, we have a beautiful palace called as Queen's Palace. Then another palace is there, which is inside a water tank. This is a guard's quarter. Again, these names are not original, real. We don't know why they called the guard's quarters. This is the external view. This is how it looks from inside. This is the famous elephant stable. This is how it looks from the side. This is how it looks from front. And this is a treasury. And now it is the Museum of the Archaeological Survey of India. And these are the 3 different watchtowers in 3 different corners. Okay. And you can see all 3 are 3 different designs. This is almost intact, almost intact. Upper part is gone. So the presence of such important watchtowers inside this enclosure indicate that maybe this was very important important location and it was supposed to be protected. Now we were talking about landscape. So what we see in this earlier slide, we see man-made constructions, but here a watchtower has been constructed using the natural landscape. Natural height was used to make a watchtower. We have another such structure. So you can see in the background, this is the king's balance. Tuladana, king used to donate according to his weight during specific days. And the image of the king and his two wives, Krishnadevaraya and his two wives, can be seen in the pedestal of one side of the pillar. Now coming to the landscape concept, we were talking about roads and saying these things. So Tungabhadra River is the background. You can see here, the locally present stones were cut into small slabs to create pathways. In the inscriptions, we find three types of concepts. One is Heddari, that is main road, Dari, normal road, Kaludari. Kaludari means stone road or pathway in which stones were cut to make a passage kind of thing. Then last part is the gates. So we come across three types of gates: Hebagelu, that is main gates, Bagelu, just gate, and Diddi, small gate or gateway kind of thing. So we have many inscriptions which mention about it. So here we have, this is called as Bhima Gateway. It is part of fortification. You can see the fortification wall. Why it is called as Bhima Gateway? Because inside of it, there are two relief sculptures which represent the Mahabharata hero Bhima killing Duryodhana. And here you have, sorry, not Duryodhana, Dushashana. And here you have Draupadi. So because of the presence of this epic character, the name of the gateway was called as Bhima Gateway. This is the Singharada Hebagalu, or called as Talari Ghatta. This is a double-story gateway. This is a picture from the British reports. So you can see the difference. This is how it was discovered, and this is how it is there after the restoration and conservation work. This is another one gateway, double-story gateway, cut out of the normal rock. And it is just a passage between the Vithala temple to the Virushpaksha temple route. This is called as a doomed gateway. Doom, as you know, the word doom comes from the structure of this particular thing. And it is part of fortification. The whole fortification has been destroyed after the reservoir was constructed in this region. And as a result, many things were destroyed. This is a Pansupari Bazaar in opposite of Hazara Rama temple. And it is, again, the upper part is gone. This is two sides of the same structure. So you can see how the entrance was planned for the passage. These are the remains of a bridge. And this is a water tank, which is underground, which is called as Malpalgudi well. It is underground, and this is how it looks from inside. Even now also it has water inside. And this was my presentation. The last part is why we have to study about architecture, or why you need to study about cultural landscape. So there are some points which I have given, that architecture or cultural landscape helps us in understanding the relation between human society, human technology, and the available material. So for any researcher or any history student, it is a very good concept which you can understand the technology, the society, and the political framework of a particular period. Then you also find out about elite and non-elite, that is royal rich people. Okay, so this was the last slide. I just rushed through it so I can focus on it for a few minutes until everybody gets back to the group. So now I was talking about, this is especially important for students of history or archaeology who are interested in doing research in the future, that why we have to study architecture, or why there's a need to focus on cultural landscape. See, traditionally history refers only to the text concept, theoretical concepts. But when we look at cultural landscapes, or when we try to understand history, from architectural point of view or cultural point of view, looking at physical material in front of us, then it helps us in understanding, identifying, and studying in detail about the social interactions, what was happening in the society, how different groups, different communities were intermingling with each other, how they were responding to each other, what was the place given to them in a particular terrain or in a particular landscape. So all these things help us in understanding how that particular society was growing, evolving, or if there was any kind of discrimination or any kind of problems were being faced. The other thing which is there is a common thing which we see all over the world, not only in India, all over the world. Wherever we find urban settlements, you can say where the people stay, population is settled down. It can be a village, it can be a town, it can be a city. All of them is called as a settlement. But when a town which has usually a independent economy, it does not require anything from outside, it can sustain on its own. When it starts exchanging goods and trade with other communities and other villages, then there is a chance that it's going to grow or evolve as a town, depending on the trade and other factors. So when we look at the landscapes, we will see that most of the cities, most of the urban centers, they have similar planning all over the world. So maybe they may have same layout depending on their similarities in geography and similarity of the climate. And they may share similar kind of features, again, based on what kind of material is there, what kind of resources are available, and what kind of cultural groups are residing in that area. Always the landscape is going to be divided into private and public sections. So even if you go to a temple, you will see in temple, some areas are private in nature, some are for public. And economic activity zone, none of the city or urban centers or economic centers can survive without some kind of activity of commercial nature going on. So each landscape needs to have an economic activity, and that economic activity again depends on its social, political, cultural, and geographical nature, and how the space is organized, how the space has been set so that all these factors can work in the most prominent and successful manner. And lastly and finally, our architecture, what we build, it represents, it reflects our life. It represents our social status, it represents our financial status, it also represents our spiritual thought process. And that is not true only in history. Even at present times, if a person is constructing his house, all these factors will be reflected in his own house construction. So that is why when we study architecture or cultural landscapes, it helps us to understand the human psychology and human behavior of a particular period based on only the physical remains and physical structures. So these are the things, the reasons why we need to study architecture or cultural landscape. This is a select bibliography of some of the works which I have referred during the presentations, and some websites which I have referred, that mentions websites I mentioned in the particular slide itself. So if anybody has any question, Panichami sir, what should I do?
Yeah, okay, madam. Now we will go for discussion, madam.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Sudha madam, you can ask and start your query. Sudha madam. Yeah, we'll ask questions, please. Audience should ask more questions. Hello. Participants will ask questions. Madam, you have to ask more questions.
Yeah, I think in chat I am seeing one question. It is from Dr. A. Sadish Kumar. Please explain the foreign travelers' contribution towards the Vijayanagara architecture.
Yeah.
Okay.
You go ahead.
So we have many foreign travelers who visited Vijayanagara before the period, during their period, and afterwards. But your question is, you are asking whether the foreign travelers contributed towards Vijayanagara architecture. No, we don't have any hard and fast evidence that any foreign traveler came and did any construction. We don't also come across any grants or any kind of donations made by such travelers. But we have some information about some Portuguese soldiers. Okay, so Abdul Razak, one of the Persian travelers who came to this part during 13th, 14th century, he mentions that in the Vijayanagara capital, there was a particular area which was called as Moorish quarters. This is in translation, not the original. Okay, so in Moorish quarters, he says that the Portuguese officers were residing. Okay, we know that the second dynasty of the empire, they were very friendly with the Portuguese, and they had hired Portuguese military officials and soldiers to train their own soldiers. So they were living in that area, they were residing in the capital, we know for sure, but whether they have done any construction, we have no evidence. But the foreigners are represented. If you remember today's presentation, I was showing you the Mahanavami Tibba. The Mahanavami Tibba has very beautiful reliefs, sculptures on all the four sides. So some of those sculptures represent Central Asian, that is Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, that region. Dancers from that, male as well as female, who were from that part of Asia, in different forms, dancing, music, other things, they are represented in sculptures. But I don't think any constructions have been made by those people. Any other question?
If you have any other doubts, please, you have to raise the questions. Hello?
You can write the question in the chat also.
Yeah, I'm looking here, madam.
Yeah.
If you have any other questions, queries,
Okay, it is there. I got one more question.
okay.
It is from Dr. A. Subhash. What is the influence of earlier dynasties on Vijayanagara architecture? See, Vijayanagara itself is not a single dynasty. It's a group of 4 dynasties. Okay, and all these 4 dynasties, they had their own style. But what we see earlier dynasties, Hoysalas were there, Kadambas were there, Chalukyas were there in this particular region. So when we look at the construction of particular temples, we have some influence, maybe in the sculptures, maybe in the pillars, maybe in some design. But otherwise, basically the religious architecture of Vijayanagara period, it was more of Dravidian Shaili or Dravidian school of constructions, and it started its own new trends. And very few examples of Hoysala influence can be seen directly. It had its own version, which became a role model for the next generations. We don't see much influence from the older these things. But if we look at the contemporary other cultures, for example, Vijayanagara Empire, it was contemporary to the Bahmani rulers, okay, or rulers from the Bijapur area. So we find Indo-Islamic influence on the constructions of Vijayanagara, what we see in Lotus Mahal or something. So it is not very clear whether they had copied anything. Influence will always be there, either in language or in culture, but it is not that strong. They started their own traditions, which were more popular in later period. I hope that answers your question. And then another one question is from Guru Murthy sir, is archaeologists continuing their excavation and restoration process even in this pandemic period? No, it will be illegal to do the work in the pandemic period. No, Archaeological Survey of India and State Archaeology both have stopped working since the first lockdown was announced by the government. Even all the archaeological sites, if you know, follow the news, they have been closed. Public is not allowed. So no, work has not been done. Physically, they are not excavating, but historians never stop. They keep studying. So studying is going on. Excavation has stopped because of the pandemic. And next is from Dr. Ramajayam sir. What is the main significance of Vijayanagara architecture? Okay, so Vijayanagara architecture, the main significance or main features what you can say is, before I will just compare, I'm not much familiar with the Tamil Nadu architectural traditions. I will answer only on the base of my knowledge about Karnataka architectural traditions. Before Vijayanagara, we had Hoysala dynasty. They had a very specific feature of temple construction. The temples were made of chloritic schist, a green color, very soft stone, which was not suitable for heavy constructions. The temples were not very tall. The temples were not very high, but the stone was soft and it was very perfect for carving. So the Hoysala temples which were created, they had very beautiful sculptures, but the Shikhara was very small and all those things. They didn't had a boundary wall. They didn't had a Raya Gopura or a big entrance way. But when Vijayanagara constructions we see, especially from the point of view of Hampi area, the locally available material was granite. So all the constructions are granite. Most of the constructions are of granite. They made huge Shikhara of the temple as well as the Raya Gopura. Raya Gopura, as you are familiar in Tamil Nadu also, the entrance of the temple. So this Gopura tradition in this area was started by the Vijayanagara. Before that, we don't have the Gopura tradition. Then next thing was the complex of the temple developed. That means earlier, even Hoysala time also, even before that also, temples used to be a single structure. One temple, maybe on a platform, that's it. Okay. But in Vijayanagara period, temple grew as an organ, as a huge body. There was a temple with subsidiary shrines, different mandapas, Kalyana Mandapa, Amma Mandapa, surrounded by a boundary wall. Each boundary wall has many small mandapas, which were used either as office of the Mata or the temple or staying or accommodation for the devotees or pilgrims visiting in that area. It used to have a beautiful Gopura, Rathavidi, all those things. So the complex became more large, the size increased, and many donations started coming. And these temples became the center of economic activities. If you look at the inscriptions of Vijayanagara, we find out that these temples were working as an institution of giving grants, giving money on interest, working as a bank. They had artists who were performing theater art. So the temples were becoming more and more dominant in the society, and the temple architecture was becoming more and more complex. So that is one of the main features of the Vijayanagara temples. Another one very interesting question is from John Ramesh. If any treasure was found in Temple of Vijayanagara Empire? Well, treasures are always there.
Madam, I am.
Yes, sir.
Madam, I am Dr. S.S. Ramajam, guest faculty, Department of History,
Yes, sir.
Government Arts College, Dindivanam, Tamil
Yes,
Nadu State.
Okay, sir, please
I am very satisfied with your great response and great explanation of Vijayanagara architecture. I am very fully satisfied, madam. Thank you once again.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Okay, thanks, sir. And
Also,
I was
sir, please
looking
ask
at the
questions, sir.
question. Somebody else is asking question?
Yeah.
1 second, ma'am.
Yes, sir.
Ma'am, actually, it's very useful to us, ma'am. Thank you so much for your valuable speech. I learned a lot of things from your slideshows and which you are taught in this conference.
Thank you.
I want to know that only one thing, who created Hampi? Especially, could you please tell me one person, those who are very specific, important person, those who are
Hello?
Hello?
Yeah. So I think, are you asking me, there's important people who have worked on Hampi?
what we say. Sorry,
Huh?
sorry, ma'am.
I didn't understand your question. Do you want to know the important people who have worked on Hampi?
Yes.
Okay. See, Hampi, it has been a very popular site in Karnataka or in India. Many scholars have been working in this area from last 100 years or plus. And most of their works are available on the internet or any good libraries. For example, one of the earliest photographs of the site from 1850s was published by Alexander Greenlaw. Those books are available, and it gives you how the site used to look like, how the buildings used to look like almost 150 years ago. In later period, especially if I look at the people who have worked on
Hello, please.
different kind of people. Yeah. So, for example, there are some scholars, because it's a huge site, and in history you are familiar, there are many disciplines and sub-disciplines.
Hello, keep quiet.
Okay. Sorry.
Madam, please,
Yeah.
some participants.
I'm getting good scolding. Okay. Anyways.
Madam, some participants are unmuted the mic.
Okay, so I will just continue with the answer, otherwise the time will run off. So, madam, actually, they are not single groups. There are many scholars on different fields of Vijayanagara they have studied. For example, epigraphy, about the inscriptions of Vijayanagara, many scholars have worked. For example, Vasundhara Philosia, Pierre Philosia, Dr. M. Kotresh, and there are many people, S.H. Ritti. And for archaeology part, many scholars, many directors, and many officials of Archaeological Survey of India have published various reports. And like example, Punacha, then Sharma, I.K. Sharma, they have worked on it. Independent of ASI, there was a major project, Vijayanagara Research Project, which was taken by George Michel and John Fritz. They had worked on this area, extensive survey they had done, and they have published many books, and they have worked on the geography of that area, and they have mapped it using the latest scientific technology. So you can look at their publications. And then earliest, if you look at, we have in 1936 itself, there was a very famous publication on Vijayanagara Sextilitary volume. It was published after the 600 years of Vijayanagara was over. To celebrate that occasion, a volume was released, and it has publications of many scholars on different subjects related to Vijayanagara Empire. T.V. Mahalingam has worked, Venkatacharya has worked, K. Neelkant Shastri has worked, and one of the most famous books is by Robert Sewell, that is The Forgotten Empire. So a lot of work has been done in epigraphy, in inscriptions, and in coins, as well as in architecture. And I think that answers your question. And if you are interested in looking at the bibliography related to Vijayanagara, you can go to the IGNCA site, Indira Gandhi National Center for Arts. That site has published a huge bibliography collection of many dynasties. So that includes Vijayanagara also. So you can find more than 50,000 books written by different scholars on different subjects in different languages at the IGNCA site. Please, you can see that.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Parameswar sir, if you want to ask questions. Parameswar sir. Hello. Parameswar sir, yeah, you want to ask questions? Ask.
No, sir. No, thanks, please.
Oh,
No, thanks.
okay, sir, madam.
Very nice speech.
Yeah, thank
Madam,
you.
very good thought-provoking lecture.
Okay,
Thank
sir.
you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, sir. Thank you.
Professor Panichammy, please send the feedback link, Professor.
Sir, I am sending to everyone. Sir, please ask questions. Madam, Sudha madam.
Okay. Thank you, Professor. Thank you.
Sudha madam, you got to ask question, madam. Sudha madam? Yeah. Sudha madam?
No,
Unmute,
no,
yeah.
sir. No, sir.
No.
No, sir. Okay. No.
Okay, then
Okay.
this is time to...
Madam, very nice. Madam, very
Thank
nice
you, sir.
presentation and a thought-provoking session. Thank you, madam.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay.
Please organizing member and secretary, kindly please send a feedback link.
Okay, madam, this is time to conclude. Madam, okay, this is time
Yes,
to
sir.
vote of thanks for our resource persons. We are very happy to invite her. First of all, we thank our beloved principal of our college, and also I thank our head of the department. They are very supporting to us. this Department of History always organizing well organizing with very good resource persons in various topics. And also, I think so, among the all webinars, this session was very successful one because our madam, she has delivered well, and also she has very well in her areas of Vijayanagara architecture, and also she has elaborated his elaborated her that areas of specialization about the landscape of Vijayanagara art and architecture in the particularly the capital of the Hampi. Madam, really, I am very thankful to you, madam, because our relationship immediately you accepted my invitation, and also I thank our organizing secretary. She mostly she convey her regards to you because you are accepting this seminars only. This is for her only because she is always asking, sir, you have to organize that seminar for me also. By the time I am realizing you have to present over here. I am really
Thank you,
thank
sir.
you, madam. Thank you so much to one and all. Okay, thank you.